Hello, my friends. Mr. Dan here, back again with another Vehicular Terror review. On the road on hopefully one of the last cold mornings of April. Probably not. Yes, as you can see, I will be reviewing both the original 1986 film, The Hitcher, which is certainly a very influential, kind of important film from my youth. One that was almost mandatory viewing and renting from the video store and viewing with a bunch of friends back in high school. A film which I had seen several times, but I hadn't seen in years until now. And I was prompted to revisit that based on seeing the remake of The Hitcher, which, as you can see, is on this two-pack here, this double feature with The Strangers, which is actually the reason why I bought this. The Hitcher was actually an afterthought. Since I reviewed The Strangers Pray at Night, I wanted to go back and watch the Strangers, which I haven't done yet. So I said, why not just throw in The Hitcher, see what that's about, knowing that it was starring Sean Bean, who's played a few villains in his time. That was about all I knew about it. I hadn't heard too much about it one way or the other. I've read a few negative things, but that doesn't mean anything. And I was so impressed with it and so happy with it that I actually went back and rewatched the original. Sadly, as far as physical copies go, this is all I have. This rather cheap double feature featuring The Hitcher and The Strangers Pray at Night. No special features on the disc. The Hitcher 2007 is directed by Dave Meyers. This is part of Michael Bay's Platinum Dunes production company. And I know that if you say Michael Bay, people start rolling their eyes. And that and the fact that Dave Meyers is primarily a video director, and I mean music video, and I mean like dozens upon dozens of them. It's not that he's dabbled in that like a few directors. You know, like Don Coscarelli, famously directing Ronnie James Dio, Last in Line. That seems to be his main thing. So you might say, oh my gosh, 2007, Michael Bay, Dave Meyers, this is going to be kind of flashy. There might be a little bit of that, and I think there's one sequence that was maybe influenced by that, you know, the Michael Bay, Dave Meyers kind of a feel, but I think it actually worked really well. As a matter of fact, some people say it's the only good sequence in the film. I don't believe that at all. I think this is a good film, start to finish. A good remake. It changed some things, which I appreciated. But we'll get into that. First, if anyone's unfamiliar with The Hitcher, essentially you have a protagonist, or in the case of the sequel, two protagonists, because now we have a couple, who's basically, they're going on a cross-country journey, and early in the morning hours, with bad weather outside, and with in the case of the original film, with severe tiredness ensuing, he decides to pick up a hitchhiker. In the second film, they try to avoid picking up the hitchhiker who they see, but unfortunately they have to stop for gas, and he comes in, he gets dropped off, and the clerk in the store pretty much, you know, it gets up in their business and almost creates a situation where they have to give this guy a ride. And one of the differences in the second film is you have two college students. So the Jim Halsey character is played by Zachary Knight in the sequel, and his girlfriend Grace is played by Sophia Bush, whereas in the original, Jim is played by C. Thomas Howell. And he meets a woman named Nash in a restaurant. She's a waitress in a restaurant who sort of becomes his helper. But they hadn't known each other prior to the events in the film. So I think that was a very clever way to update it, because there's going to be like a female counterpart to the protagonist, so why not just make them boyfriend and girlfriend in the sequel, and then you don't have to spend a lot of time with scenes where they get to know each other. You can focus more on the cat and mouse aspects of the film regarding the Hitcher. And getting back to the plot, they both quickly regret picking this guy up because he's odd. And in the original film, he's played by Rutger Hauer, the legendary Rutger Hauer, in a crazy, kind of a very quirky, scary performance. A very uniquely Rutger Hauer performance. And as I said, Sean Bean plays the Hitcher in the remake. Now, he may seem like an obvious choice, given that around 2007, he had primarily done a lot of. He was primarily the villain in most films. Even when he was a good guy, he was always this kind of roguish good guy. It's rare that he's like purely a protagonist, especially at that time. So you might think that was not maybe the most original casting, but he really does a good job. I had no problems with Sean Bean's performance. Rutger Hauer portrays kind of a very unique, kind of quirky insanity, and the Sean Bean character has more sort of just plainly violent intentions on display, I would say. Having said that, I'd be curious to see actually which character had more lines of dialogue. The Sean Bean character might actually have more dialogue than the Rutger Hauer character. I'm not. And by the way, they both give the name John Ryder, which turns out that's not that actually the real name. And you learn that they've kind of been doing this for a while. Now, the original Hitcher was directed by Robert Harmon, one of his first films. He would go on to direct another film, which I featured in the Vehicular Terror series, Highwayman, where Combe Frior played the villain, and in that movie, which was excellent, by the way. If you haven't checked out that review, check it out, and check out that film. That was from about 2004, a few years before the remake of The Hitcher. That you have a villain that has a completely fleshed out backstory. Okay, we learn everything about him. We learn his motivation. So I like the way that Robert Harmon decided he was going to take a similar idea and give a lot of backstory to the villain, where in both of these films, it really serves the plot well that we don't know anything about the villain. You get the idea that he's been doing it before. When he's finally caught and fingerprinted by the police, the fingerprints don't show up. He's basically a nobody, okay? And his ability to sort of guess where the protagonists are going, to show up ahead of time and to find them in the open desert. The original one, I believe, takes place in Texas, and the remake takes place in Arizona, I believe, possibly New Mexico. Same kind of country, vast. I mean, where I am, there are rest stops and exits all over the place, okay? There you have to go long distances between, those kinds of places, restaurants, rest stops and restaurants and bus stops and things like that. And by the way, both films do a really good job of capturing that. When they pull into a gas station or a restaurant. In the remake, you kind of get why the clerk is like real talkative. He's in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night, Both films really capture that well. They capture what it's like to be a police officer in that kind of open country. They really showcase the area well. But in both films, the Hitcher has this almost uncanny ability to be where he needs to be. And he's almost like a mythic character. These are not supernatural films, but they're getting close to that edge there where you kind of wonder what's going on here. How is he able to do this? Both films have sequences that strain believability as far as what he's able to do, because he's not he's not above being caught in both films. The Hitcher will be caught. He's actually begging at one point in a famous scene in both films for the Jim Halsey character or one of the protagonists to shoot him, like putting the gun to his head. But of course there are consequences if that happens. He sets up a trap there, which if anyone has seen the original film, you know exactly what I'm talking about, in a famous scene. And the remake really recreated that scene well. They did a great job with that. But his ability to to pull that off in a short time, it strains believability, but that's okay. There were a lot of films like that in the 80s that did that. Yes, it almost reminds me of some early Clint Eastwood westerns like Pale Rider and High Plains Drifter, where it's heavily implied that the Clint Eastwood character, who is almost like an avenging force, possibly an avenging angel, or maybe something from the opposite spectrum, is a supernatural being. You almost get that sense about the Hitcher. The thing I like is the casting of the police presence in both films. In the original film, Jeffrey DeMunn plays Captain Estridge, and in the remake, Neil McDonough plays Lieutenant Estridge, and he actually has a more prominent role because in the original film, much of the dialogue between Captain Estridge and Jim, where the police are trying to coax Jim, into turning himself in as he's been framed for much of the doings of the Hitcher. He's actually on the radio for much of the film, where in the remake you get to see Neil McDonough's character much earlier. I thought that was a smart thing to do. So there you go, guys. I'm not going to say too much more. I highly recommend that you give the remake a chance. I thought it was very good, and I had a great time revisiting the original. I really had a blast with both films. I highly recommend you check them out. And I'll catch you next time for the next installment in the Vehicular Terror series. Thanks a lot.